Euro Truck Simulator 2 and American Truck Simulator can be incredibly immersive and beautiful. But how do you set it up to have the most realistic and immersive experience while driving? Today I'll show you the settings I've refined over the years, and we'll look at gameplay, interface, controls and force feedback, as well as sound, graphics options and mods. I've started a completely new profile over on my second channel, where I'm driving with these realistic settings and mods to have that beautiful and immersive experience in Euro Truck Simulator 2. I've also set myself the additional challenge of not being allowed to use GPS at all. If you want to see how that goes, I'll link the first video of that series from my second channel in the video description and the pinned comment down below. But now, without any further ado, let's get started. And we'll start here in the gameplay sections of the in-game options. Fatigue simulation and traffic offense are settings that are a little bit personal preference, but I prefer to have those for a realistic playthrough. The job length factor I've reduced to 75% just because I want a little bit shorter trips for my playthrough, but you can leave this as is or even increase it, all dependent on what you want in terms of jobs in-game. Parking difficulty, this is also a little bit personal preference. I prefer to have always skill parking, but you can also just put it on safe or random. That's also totally fine. Just set whatever you want. I personally just like the challenge of parking, so I always want the more difficult ones. Random road events. This one is just the side events, so traffic incidents and stuff on the side of the road, which may cause you to slow down a little bit, but don't really hinder you in any major way. I've set this to 33%. This just has some events that I can see from time to time, but it doesn't get overwhelming. This is enough for me. Rain probability is one that I wouldn't set too high unless you really want a lot of rain. 15% in my experience is more than enough to have some rain from time to time, and it sometimes is even there for a longer period of time, but more than 15% really makes it to where you're driving in the rain, in my opinion, a little bit too much. But play with this if you want. Time zones I have on full info. This isn't really that important, but you can play with this if you are not satisfied with how the times are displayed. But the next option is a really big one, which is show blockers. So the big X's that you can see on roads which you are not allowed to go on. The problem if you disable those, especially if you don't have the map or the GPS open all the time, and since I drive without GPS at all, this is really bad, so I wouldn't even know if I'm going to a street which I can't go to, and then I would just hit an invisible wall. You can disable that with mods once again, but that also introduces more problems than are worth in my opinion, so I would always keep these blockers on. There is a way to make them less intrusive though, I'll show you later in the mods section. For the transmission, use whatever you feel like you want. I'm driving ETS2 right now with mostly modern trucks, so I'm using automatic and real automatic in my case, so you actually have to switch between forwards and reverse at least. If you have an H-pattern shifter and are driving a truck that has an H-pattern gearbox, feel free to use H-shifter here. If you're using automatic though, I would recommend disabling the adaptive automatic transmission, but definitely enable smart sequential shifting, otherwise your truck will go through every single gear, which it doesn't always have to do. Now for truck physics. This is where a lot of the realism is coming from, and normally I would lower all these values by quite a bunch, but I actually have a mod installed that takes care of all of this to make the driving and the stability of the truck and the trailer way more realistic. And that is why I have all the stabilities for the truck at 100%. I just reduced the drive shaft torque to 50% because that was a little bit too exaggerated for my feeling, which is when you are accelerating with a trailer and your truck seems to pull to the right because of the twisting. One important thing for me for realism is braking intensity. Brakes in ETS2 as standard are a little bit too good and too effective. So I've reduced brake intensity to 75%, which makes the braking to me feel more realistic. As for air brake simulation, realistic fuel consumption and cabin accessory physics, this is all enabled to have a realistic feel and behavior of the truck. For assistance systems, well, you can just enable whatever you like. I personally use the truck speed limiter if the truck has it, and even adaptive cruise control if it's in there. I would, however, recommend to disable lane assistant mode as well as the blind spot sensor, because that can get really annoying in my opinion. It also takes away from the fun of actually driving the truck. Rain sensor, use whatever you feel like. I'm using it, it's fine for me. But everything else in terms of automatic systems I have disabled, apart from automatic blinker turn off. That's just a standard thing that has been in cars and trucks for years and decades at this point. And then I have enabled the ABS and TC systems because I feel like modern trucks do use these. If you feel like you're driving an older truck and those wouldn't have that, feel free to disable once again. Emergency brake systems disabled, but I have enabled automatic differential lock and automatic drop of liftable axes. This is one that I might disable in the future, depending on my testing. This is not something that I'm super familiar with. Smart throttle control is off. And now for the trailer stuff, I have enabled advanced trailer coupling. This is, I think, really important if you want the actual challenge of lining up your truck with a trailer and then coupling. This makes this, I think, way more fun and interesting. Trailer cables, this is just a visual thing. Enable or disable to your liking. And trailer stability, once again, this is handled by a mod, so I've left this at 100%. And then down here we just have camera things, which use whatever you feel like. Maybe you want the steering camera rotation. I don't, because I use head tracking, but yeah, look through this and see what you like. In the interface section, I have some things enabled or disabled just because I'm using no GPS and want that additional challenge. You don't have to do that, just play however you like. But some things that I can recommend is if you're displaying the navigation speed limit, show the truck speed limit, not the car one, if you're trying to drive realistically. The navigation speed warning I have disabled, I just find that a little bit annoying. And for widgets, mirrors and notifications, if you don't want to see those ever, then enable this checkbox to keep them hidden. For example, I have no widgets, no notifications because I find those intrusive and I don't want them in my immersive driving. Now for navigation, as I said, am not using GPS, so I actually have disabled almost all navigation, so I don't show the navigation line and therefore all the other options don't really matter to me. And then we just have a bunch of regional settings. I think just look through those yourself and set whatever you feel like is best for you in terms of language and units and such. So that is basically it. Contextual hints I have disabled because once again I found those really annoying and they just pop up whenever I don't want them, so they are disabled. In terms of other things, look through these and just enable and disable whatever you feel like. Nothing really important here anymore. Now let's get to what I think is one of the most important things, which are the controls of the truck. And that heavily depends on what you are using. If you're driving with mouse and keyboard or a controller, then the settings will probably be a little bit different from what I'm using. So I'm specifically talking about actually driving with a steering wheel. And what I found is that you can actually get really nice force feedback out of ETS2. But it's a little bit of a hassle to actually fine-tune and set up right. So let me show you what I'm using both here in game and also on my wheelbase. One of the most important things, in my opinion, is the steering animation range, coupled with the maximum rotation angle on your wheelbase. If your wheel allows it, go up to 1800. That, in my opinion, makes a huge difference in terms of realism. You do have to turn the steering wheel a lot more in the truck than you do in your regular car. So set 1800 degrees here if your wheel allows it. And now for force feedback, and we'll go through the in-game settings first. I found that I actually need to increase the overall gain by quite a bit, and I've set this to 180%. This will of course depend on the wheelbase that you have and how much Newton meters you do have. My wheelbase is only 5 Newton meters, so I have to increase this quite a lot. But this is your main adjustment for the overall strength of the force feedback. Everything else here though should work on every single wheelbase, maybe with a few tweaks and adjustments here and there. So what I've come up with over the years that I've been playing is this. I've set the centering at high speed to 100%. That just lets me center the wheel quite quickly when I'm doing high speeds. I've lowered it though at low speeds to 45% because there I sometimes don't want the wheel to just center very quickly, especially if I'm at a standstill, then I don't want to center it at all. So this gives me a little bit more of a fine difference between high and low speed. Internal friction is at 25%. This just gives the wheel a little bit of resistance, but not too much. Engine resonance, this I had to decrease quite a lot. I have it at 6% now. If you turn this up more, then you will feel a lot of rumbling through the wheel. This can be nice, but don't overdo it, otherwise every other force feedback effect will be gone and you will just have numb hands after a while. Terrain surface I've set to 40%, bumps to 75%, collisions to 45%. those all just make the force feedback on specific events, so on rough terrain, on bumps and with collisions, as manageable and also as intense as I want them. Gearbox grind is at 25%, understeer slip at 30%. This for me is more than enough. Assisted steering, this is only if you're using the lane assist feature, which I personally don't, so this setting doesn't matter to me, but if you do, this sets how the intensity of the assisted steering actually is, so how much the game will turn your wheel if you have lane assist on. I would say use this with caution, but if you want to use it, this is the setting for it. Then if we scroll down, these things I can't adjust. And then it's just about all the different axes. I've set some dead zones where I need them, but that's basically it. And if you do have an H pattern shifter, then you can set that up here for every single gear, high and low, and set the shifter layout from splitter to all kinds of different other layouts. Play around with this if you're using an H pattern. And that's basically it for the in-game settings. So let me now quickly go through the wheelbase settings. As I said, I'm using a 5 Nm wheelbase, the Fanatec CSL DD, and you can see here my sensitivity, which is the range of rotation, is set at 1800 degrees. So as I said, as we were going through the in-game settings, if your wheelbase allows this, set it to 1800, because this makes just the feel of trucking a lot more realistic to me. If your wheelbase only allows something lower, say 900 degrees, then set it also in the game to 900 degrees, otherwise your wheel and the in-game one wouldn't match up. But I would say set this to 1800 degrees or as high as you can and then match in-game. Force feedback strength is at 100% and the scale at peak, just to get the maximum force feedback out of the wheelbase itself. But I've set up some damping, friction and inertia, 30%, 10%, 15% respectively, to have that little bit more of resistance in the wheel when turning. Feel free to take a look at what wheelbase you're using and what kind of settings are allowed there for the internal damping and friction. To just try to get as close to a feel of a steering wheel that you would expect from a truck. Interpolation filter is set at 3, so that I have a little bit of smoothing but not too much. And force effect intensity I reduced to 90 because I had some little bit too sharp effects that with reducing that a little bit went completely away. Force effect, swing effect and damper effect strength are at 100% at default. That just works for me. And brake force is at 65%. That for my brake pedal means that I have to press it almost fully to get 100% braking, which then when driving the truck lets me actually be quite gentle with the brake and being able to just modulate it a lot easier. Now let's go to audio, which is another big part of realism and immersion. The master volume, well, that just adjusts the overall volume, set this to whatever you need, but the interesting stuff comes down here. Well, for me, on interface side of things, I don't want any music or UI sounds. I just find those annoying and breaking my immersion, so I've reduced all of those to 0. But for truck sounds, I found this mix for me feel the most realistic and immersive. So truck engine volume is at 60%, exhaust at 50%. The turbo I've reduced to 10%. That is maybe not as realistic, but I just find the turbo whine to be too annoying over a long period of time of driving. So I had to reduce this, even though it's maybe not the most realistic. You can leave this higher if the tone doesn't annoy you as much, but for me it gets too much. So I had to reduce it to 10%. Truck effects is at 45% and truck noise at 60%, while the trailer noise is at 50%. The backup beeper you can enable or disable here. I usually have it on because it makes sense, but if it gets too annoying you can disable that here. For interior sounds I've set this to 45%. And radio I don't usually use, especially when recording a video, so this is at 0. But then you can also enable or disable changing of the sound when you open the windows with this one. If you don't have that, then you can have the noise of the air, but to me it just makes more sense to have actually changing sound when you're opening the windows. And then you have the reverb effect of the cabin. That also just makes sense to me. And then we come to exterior sounds, and I have enabled rumble strips. That also once again just makes sense to hear those. The traffic volume is at 50%. If you feel like that's a little bit too low for you, you can increase it. Ambient sounds volume, that I've increased to 90%. I just want to hear a little bit more of the world around me. And same goes for the world sound effects at 70%. So that contrary to the ambient sound, which is just environmental sounds of nature and stuff like that. The world sound is more construction site, company depots and all of that. And then also enable the reverb effect of the environment. If you're using voice navigation, you can can set the volumes here and also the language and stuff like that. I'm not using it, so I have it completely disabled. Same for CB radio, I don't use this at all. Now for graphics. This one is, well, once again, a little bit personal preference and also dependent on your system and on what mods you do have installed. So I'm just gonna talk a little bit in general here, and then we're gonna take a look at the mods, which there are some that can really increase and improve your visual quality. So I'll talk about that then. So in terms of display up here, this is all dependent on what kind of monitor you have and stuff like that. But when it comes to image quality, this is where it gets interesting. If you're not using any paid mods and plugins, then probably scaling is your most important factor of making the game look better. If your system can allow it, you can increase the scaling, which will internally render the scenes at a way higher resolution. And you can see this on the right here, it makes the image way more crisp and sharp. So if you don't use any other tools to make the game more beautiful, then this is your best bet, and it all depends on what your system can handle. Because I am using some external mods and plugins, am just using 150% because otherwise my system would not be able to handle this anymore. If I wasn't using those, I would be using probably like 300% scaling. Same for anti-aliasing. If you're not using any external tools, then you can use anti-aliasing from here, for example TAA or SMMA and TAA. Play around with this and see what looks good to you and doesn't cost too much performance. But for me, using a plugin is actually the way better way, because I can then get DLSS and DLAA, which the game does not support natively. And for the rest, once again, this is all dependent on what your system can handle. These are my settings. Feel free to look at those and pause at any time you want. But yeah, I think this is mostly just dependent on what you like and what your system can handle. But now it's time to look at mods. And I'm using for this profile, which I just started the playthrough on, and I've linked this down below, 21 mods. Some of those are for better graphics, some are just for more realism, and some are just personal preference. And also, most of those are free, some are paid though. Starting from the top here. Smaller dead-end barriers, this is just an immersion thing. Normally the dead-end barriers are big X's, very visible. I use this mod to make them way smaller, less intrusive, therefore just more immersive to me. No GPS player icon, this is just for me personally because I'm playing with no GPS and I want that challenge, and this just removes the player icon from the map, so you don't even know where you currently are and need to figure that out by looking at the world itself. Icons is a really awesome mod that removes a lot of those flashy and moving and colorful zones on the ground, be that for picking up a job, for parking and stuff like that. This just makes those a lot less intrusive and more immersive, which I personally really like. Dark ETS2 background map, that just makes the map a little bit nicer, as well as actually showing you the countries on the map, which for some reason the vanilla map doesn't do. Top info bar, that's just a replacement for the route advisor, which I like because I don't want to see the GPS, so the map at all, and this just gives me important information if I need it. This is also something I just enable from time to time. And now for some mods that make the game a lot more realistic to me. AI Traffic Pack by Jessica, really nice add-on, just adds a lot of variety to the traffic with a lot of different cars, highly recommended. Real company and trailers, multiple variants of those, real European companies, real European gas stations, all of those just make the fictional companies, gas stations and trailers and trucks be replaced by actual ones from the real world. This is something that if you don't want that, you don't want to see the real companies and basically have adverts in your game, feel free to disable those or don't use those, but I personally really like this. Just makes the whole world feel a little bit more realistic to me. Another really important one for me is real traffic density. This just makes the amount of traffic that you encounter way more realistic. To me, the density in the vanilla game without any mods is just way too low most of the time. This not only makes it higher, but also dependent on location and time. Highly recommend this one. As well as sound fixes, which just brings in a lot of fixes for sounds in a neat little pack. This is one that I've been using for a very long time. Now, realistic truck physics mod. This is the one that I was talking about when we are looking at the gameplay options. This, as the name suggests, makes the physics of the trucks a lot more realistic without having to fiddle with all the sliders of the stability of the truck and trailer in the settings. Another one that I highly recommend. And up until this point, all the mods that I was showing you are free to either download directly from the Steam Workshop, or if you can't find it there, then just put in the name into Google and you will definitely find it. Something like the AI traffic pack, for example, is not on the workshop because it's quite a huge one, but you will be able to find it by just Googling it. And now we come to two things which are paid mods, but I think they really enhance the visuals of the game, which is why I'm using them. The first one is PNG, Project Next Gen, a really awesome overhaul of all the in-game textures and visuals to just make the game look so much better. It's one that I had debated on getting for a long time, and I'm really happy that I finally did, because it makes the game look so much crisper, cleaner and more beautiful to look at. But as I said, when looking through the graphics options, if you can't or don't want to get this one because it's paid, then increasing the scaling in the options is your best bet to get at least a little bit better quality in terms of textures. And then lastly, there's one that isn't technically a mod but a plugin, and that is Snowy Moon. Snowy Moon is also paid, but another one that I do not regret getting because it just makes the lighting and therefore the overall visual quality of the game so much better. And not only that, it has some really nice lighting presets and you can fine-tune it a lot, but it also has anti-aliasing presets which are a lot better than the actual in-game ones. So you can use DLSS, DLLA, whatever you feel like. Once again, there's a lot of options for that. You can change colors and the complete tone map and some more small little things. But yeah, this one really has quite a big impact on the visual quality of the game as well. But there we have it. Those are all the settings, mods, plugins and everything that I use and have changed to make the game as realistic and immersive as possible. I hope that you found some of this useful to make your trucking experience that much better. If it did, then leave a like on the video and leave me a comment on what you personally do to make the driving in Euro Truck Simulator 2 or American Truck Simulator fun and immersive for yourself. As I said in the beginning, if you want to see me play with these settings and these mods, and with that little bit of an extra challenge without using any GPS, then check out the video I've linked below on my second channel. But now I want to thank you a lot for watching. I've been HD, have an awesome day and see you in the next one.